I have now done the stitching I told you I was going to do. So on my back vent, this is the back side with the self fabric facing on it. I did a catch stitch up this side, which I can come a little closer and show you. You can see I did a catch stitch on this side, and I don't want to see it from the other side. I did a catch stitch on the underlap of the vent on this piece that was turned back. I did a catch stitch at the very top, holding my vents to the jacket so they don't want to fall down or shift or anything. The lining will also help hold those in place. And the last thing I did was down here, this is the front facing. At the hem, I did a slip stitch to hold that front facing down. You'll see where I've clipped into the seam allowance. And that little stitch line right there is just a 5/8 inch guide that I have. Now, the other thing, and I talked about this last week, was remember, before we start doing the hem, we want to make sure that our lining is secured at the sleeve. So mine is basted in. I haven't stitched it permanently yet. And I've basted it in around the sleeve, around the armhole, to hold that in place. Because as I'm starting to put my lining in, I want to make sure that I'm not pulling or tugging anything. So I want to smooth this down. Back a little bit here. So you can see, my lining lays nice and smooth. My seam lines should all be lined up. My linings, seam lines, and the jacket seam lines should all line up. Now I want to show you what I did to prep the lining before we start sewing it in. Now remember, I talked about in class last week that when we initially sewed the lining, and in the pattern guide instructions, the part here, this is my front, this is my side panel, they had this whole piece turned back so that our lining looked like that, like it had a big opening in it, which I thought was very strange. So I have to fix that. So this is my back lining piece. As you can see, this is my center back seam. This side is correct, where we've turned back 5/8 of an inch at the top and the side of the lining. On the side piece, however, what we needed to do, and what you will do, is make sure that, let me flip this up here, I had to go inside. Here's my lining inside, upside down. And I had to clip, there we go. I had to make a clip right here so that I could release this flat piece to fold it out. So I made a clip, and now I can press this part of the lining forward. So now you can see it comes to cover up my interfacing on my vent underlap. In further preparation for the lining, what I have done is on this part, the part of the vent that covers the underlap vent, I've turned back 5/8 of an inch and pressed it. At the bottom of my lining, I have turned up 5/8 of an inch and pressed it. And then in the front of my lining, this part that's not actually attached to the front facing, that was already turned back, but I just pressed it again in preparation. So now, when I lay my lining out, before I start pinning it down to stitch it down, it should look like that. Let me turn my camera a little better for you. Okay, so your lining roughly, when the 5/8 of an inch is turned up at the bottom of your lining, it is roughly now the length of your jacket. The reason for that is so that we can, when we place it, which is placing it up higher, it gives us a little bit, we'll end up having, it's hard to do this until I sew it, a little bit of a fold down. And that gives us some ease and some movement in our lining. So what's also very important when we do this next step is Your pocket may be falling down onto your hem allowance. So you're going to want to make sure that that is out of the way when we go to stitch the lining. So I'm actually going to move my pocket up out of the way right now. The first thing we're going to do with the lining, so I'm going to take it and I fold it up the bottom of it, and I want to make sure I'm lining up my seam with my seam, and I'm placing that raw edge of my lining on the raw edge of my hem allowance. Now you can also go ahead and just mark a line, basically 5/8 of an inch down from this raw edge. But I'm going to place this. So again, there's the raw edge of my lining, there's the raw edge of my hem allowance, they're touching, and I'm just going to place this down. And because I had to adjust my hem some, I'm also probably going to go back and make sure that this is sitting very nicely and evenly across the bottom of my jacket. And I'm going to pin this in place. I'm just dealing with this front portion right now. I'm going back, and this is my raw edge is lined up, raw edge is lined up, and I'm going to pin it down. All right, so here's the front of my jacket over here. Here's my hem allowance. Let's get this a little bit above it. Again, there we go. And now you should have a bubble. Right here, there's a bubble in your lining. And what you're going to do next is you're going to slip stitch down the lining across this bottom part. You're going to do that first. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to slip stitch right here. Then I'm going to come back and show you how we finish the front part of this lining.